Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. The Kremlin has confirmed that US President Donald Trump will hold talks with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin tomorrow. The conversation will take place by phone, with both leaders set to discuss the proposed 30-day ceasefire agreement and steps towards lasting peace in Ukraine. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney invites Ukrainian President Zelensky to the G7 summit in June. This comes as Carney's first official foreign trip to Europe since he was sworn into Canada's top job. The standoff between the United States and the Houthis continues as the US launches fresh strikes on Yemen, which kills 54. This comes in response to Houthi threats against international shipping routes through the Red Sea. The United States deports hundreds of Venezuelan immigrants despite a federal judge's court order to halt the removals. The Trump administration argues that the court has no authority over the president's use of wartime powers. The deportees arrive in El Salvador in chains and are immediately sent to detention. The Trump administration announces further government layoffs, this time targeting the government-funded Voice of America. Donald Trump places nearly all employees at the network on immediate leave. An email from the government states that contractors must cease work immediately. Deadly storms sweep across the southern United States, leaving at least 40 people dead. Reports confirm 32 of the 34 storms are tornadoes, with wildfires also reported, and hundreds of thousands remain without power. US tech group Oracle announces plans to invest $5 billion in the UK over the next 5 years. This is in order to meet rapidly growing demand for cloud services, helping to drive artificial intelligence. We start with the Trump administration that has deported hundreds of Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador. The migrants were accused of being members of the Tron de Agua gang. This action came despite a federal judge's order that temporarily blocked such deportations. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt defended the administration's actions, saying the order lacked a legal basis and claimed it did not refuse to comply with rulings. The deportations were carried out under a proclamation by President Donald Trump, which declared the Venezuelan gang to be a threat to U.S. national security. This action was based on a 1798 law called the Alien Enemies Act, a law normally used in times of war. The law gives the president extraordinary powers to remove foreigners who are considered a threat. It has been used rarely in US history, last applied during World War II. The Trump administration did not provide evidence to support its claim that the deported Venezuelans were part of this Tren de Agua gang, nor did they identify criminal activities committed by these immigrants in the US. The deportations have raised concerns about the possibility of falsely accusing migrants of being gang members and removing them without due process. While El Salvador agreed to house around 300 deported immigrants in its prisons, the move has sparked outrage, particularly among immigration advocates who warn that the Alien Enemies Act could be used to target any Venezuelan citizen who is in the US and might be labeled as a gang member without opportunity for defense. Meanwhile, civil rights groups called for immediate clarification from the Trump administration. They claim the US government may have broken the court's rule. Let's in fact listen to what the US president had to say.
Well, this is a time of war because Biden allowed millions of people, many of them criminals, many of them at the highest level. They emptied jails out. Other nations emptied their jails into the United States. It's an invasion. And these are criminals, many, many criminals, murderers, drug dealers at the highest level, drug lords, people from mental institutions. That's an invasion.
We are now joined by Ross Feingold, political risk analyst, to discuss this further. Ross, thank you very much for joining us. So these Venezuelans, they were deported using this Alien Enemies Act of 1798. That was last used during World War II. How does this application of a centuries-old law align with contemporary legal standards or this administration's legal standards? And what precedent might it set for future, not just immigration policies, but also using old laws in policies that the Trump administration wants to push forward?
It's certainly a novel use of the Alien Enemies Act. It has not been used this way to deport illegal migrants in the past. But that doesn't mean that it's bad law or that it's inappropriate. There's no court that's thrown out the Alien Enemies Act. It was used in inappropriate ways during World War II when it was used to detain Japanese simply because they were ethnic Japanese and America was at war with Japan. And many of those Japanese who were detained during World War II pursuant to this act were in fact U.S. citizens. But that's not the case with some of the people that are being subject or who are being deported subject to this law. So it may be a novel use. The United States is not technically at war. The United States government has not gone through the procedures to say that we are at war at the moment. They have designated some of these transnational criminal gangs as terrorist organizations, which does help the government's case to say that we are pretty much in wartime and the Alien Enemies Act will apply. But this is going to go through the courts. As you mentioned, there's already been one judge who's expressed concerns about this, and he had actually ordered a halt on deportations. But we'll have to see how this plays out, especially at the appellate level and all the way up to the Supreme Court. There's a very good chance that this conservative Supreme Court will uphold the U.S. government's right to cite the Alien Enemies Act to deport these people.
Ross, wouldn't some people say that the fact that the Trump administration does not provide any evidence of these individuals being part of this Tren de Agua gang, is that not a fair criticism for people to make?
It's certainly a fair criticism to make, but again, if the United States government believes that these people are members, even if there's the possibility of mistakes, the government is still going to proceed with deportations. Now, of course, there'll be lawyers and non-government organizations that rush to court, but again, the courts might give the government wide latitude to deport illegal aliens. And although illegal aliens typically do have a right to be heard, the government could decide to move faster. That's also a right of the government. So we're definitely going to be entering a very litigation-heavy period with regard to what the Trump administration is doing and how it's applying the Alien Enemies Act. But I'd be very cautious about saying that what the government has done won't be upheld, because it might very well be upheld as it goes through the court system.
I want to go a bit more into the fact that this federal judge has ordered against this, the fact that these individuals were deported to El Salvador. What legal challenges could arise from the administration's decision to proceed despite this court order? And how might this affect the balance of the judiciary and the executive?
That's a really interesting question, because it will be up to the judge to order sanctions on U.S. government officials if it is proven that the government, the Trump administration, violated a court order. Now, the government's going to argue that we didn't violate a court order. These deportations were in flight before the judge ordered a halt. But ultimately, who is the judge going to really sanction? They might sanction the lawyers who argued in court on behalf of the government, but the court is not going to have the ability to bring these people back if they've already been deported. So at first glance, the court does have authority to punish the government, but in reality, it's really difficult to change the situation if the government has already deported these individuals.
As we've said previously, this act has historically been used during times of war. But how does its current invocation reflect this current administration's stance on immigration? And what are the broader implications for civil liberties of these immigrants?
Now, unfortunately, the answer to that question is we don't know, and it's another question that's going to have to be litigated in the courts because the administration is going to argue that there's been an invasion of illegal aliens. It is a national security emergency, and thus we are allowed to apply all existing laws, including this law that dates from 1798. And the courts might very well agree with the government. In fact, I would say there's a high likelihood that this Supreme Court, which is 6-3 conservative, that if these cases do reach the Supreme Court, that they're going to say that this was a decision for the administration to make. It's not really a decision for the courts to intervene in. The administration has the right to declare a national security emergency and to declare illegal migrants subject to deportation and carry out those deportations. So the courts might very well side with the administration, but we'll just have to wait for this court process to play out.
Ross, one final question. Political figures like Elon Musk are advocating for the impeachment of this judge who blocked the order. How might such political pressures influence judicial independence and the rule of law in the United States?
Certainly, conservatives frequently criticize liberal judges and liberals criticize conservative judges. I don't think there'd be enough votes either in the House to impeach or in the Senate to remove them from office. They have to get 2/3 of senators to vote to remove the judge from office. I think that's really unlikely. But we'll probably see a lot more of that in the coming months as litigation arises from some of the actions of the Trump administration, that either there'll be conservatives who are unhappy with the judge's decision or there'll be liberals who are unhappy with the judge's decision. That's why the courts on some of these matters are going to look to not make a decision, frankly. They're not going to seek to intervene. And again, to use this example, the courts might very well find that it's up to the administration to decide whether or not there's a national security emergency and thus invoke the Alien Enemies Act. So the judges might very well punt on some of these issues rather than get involved in political decisions.
Ross Feingold, thank you very much for joining us. We now move on to some more news updates. The escalating trade war between the United States and its global partners continues to disrupt international trade, with the US imposing heavy tariffs on Canada, China, and the European Union. US President Donald Trump has enacted a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminium imports, with additional duties on goods from Mexico and Canada. These moves are designed to boost American industry, but have sparked retaliatory tariffs from countries like Canada and also the EU, threatening a full-blown trade war. Here's what Trump has responded with when asked about the tariffs today.
Markets and consumers react to tariffs. Do you have any inclination to create exceptions or ease up on any?
About what?
To create exceptions to steel and aluminum tariffs.
No, I have no intention of it. No.
No. Is this
April 2nd is a liberating day for our country. We're going to be getting back some of the wealth that very, very foolish presidents gave away. It's going to be reciprocal. In other words, whatever they're charging, we're charging. Very simple. If they're charging us, we're charging them. It's no longer they charge us and we don't charge them. They charge us and we charge them. Then in addition to that, on autos, on steel, on aluminum, we're going to have some.
Canada responded with $20 billion worth in tariffs on US goods, including steel and aluminium, while the EU is preparing similar countermeasures. Meanwhile, President Trump has raised the stakes by threatening a 200% tariff on alcoholic beverages from the EU, adding to the global tension. These aggressive tariff policies are part of Trump's fair and reciprocal plan, which seeks to address trade imbalances but risks undermining the international trading system. The global impact of Trump's plan is far-reaching. Relations between the US and its traditional allies, Canada and the EU, have soured, with both nations warning of more retaliatory measures. Meanwhile, China's cautious approach has raised concerns about how long it will remain passive on this matter. Economists warn that Trump's trade policies could have dire consequences for the US economy, with the rising prices and economic instability. Let's take a closer look at the statements made by French Prime Minister François Bayrou on March the 14th in response to Trump's tariffs.
Le président réélu des États-Unis, M. Trump, a basculé dans des choix politiques qui font écho à ce que le président russe voulait imposer, qui ont exercé les pressions que vous savez sur les dirigeants ukrainiens et qui viennent en même temps d'allumer une guerre commerciale avec le Canada, avec le Mexique et avec l'Europe. Et cette guerre commerciale, c'est évident que c'est un immense danger pour l'économie de tout le...
As well as the remarks made today by French President Emmanuel Macron.
En effet, que le commerce équitable qui respecte les règles internationales est une bonne chose pour la prospérité de tous. Et il est à coup sûr plus efficace que les tarifs qui créent de l'inflation.
Despite public support for tariffs on China, American consumers are increasingly feeling the effects. A survey revealed that most Americans believe tariffs increase prices, with the burden falling primarily on US consumers and companies rather than foreign countries or businesses. The economic implications could be significant as the US risks alienating key allies and raising costs for its citizens while Trump pushes forward with the goal of revitalizing American manufacturing. We are joined by Gerard Al-Feel, marketing manager and China expert located in Dubai, to discuss this further. Thank you very much for joining us, Gerard. They charge us, we charge them. That's what Donald Trump phrases this as, and that sounds fair enough to the average person. But these effects that are going to happen in response to these tariffs, what are going to be some of the consequences that both the American consumer is going to feel and some of these key allies are going to feel?
Yes, tariffs are basically taxes, because when I import a car from somewhere and there's a tariff on it, then this additional money which the consumer has to pay will be put on the car, on the price, and the consumer in the US will then pay more for the car imported from Germany, from Japan, and so on. So tariffs are basically taxes. And President Trump has promised the American voter to make America great again, stronger again. And here's the thing. The European Union, for instance, imposed 10% tariffs on all US automobiles, but while the US has just 2.5% tariff on European autos. And Marco Rubio said something yesterday interesting in Face of the Nation, an interview. He said many of these models are from the Cold War, where we had allies, where we accepted the budget deficits with our allies, but these times are over. So it's not only economically an economic measure, but also a new time. This is a story we will tell our grandchildren, and mightily bored they will be. But seriously, there was the model that the US accepted budget deficits with certain countries, and they said now these times are over because we are revamping the whole new world order. Definitely this will be felt, but also President Trump will force certain countries like Canada, like Mexico, like the European Union to the negotiation table sooner or later.
And how can we expect this to move forward, and what kind of effects will the people on the ground in these countries will be feeling? We heard that American consumers are currently the people who are fearing this the most. Donald Trump has reassured them that things are going to be all right in the end, but economists once again are saying something different. How do we feel about these tariffs, and what can we expect from the future?
I think we had the last 4 years already a very booming stock market, and asset inflation is also kind of inflation. So a lot of heat comes now out, and this is also felt in the consumer's pocket, because the US consumer doesn't have any other retirement plan. The stock market in America is not part of the economy. The stock market is the economy. So a lot of heat and also a bit of overheating, and certain bubble effects in the tech stocks are coming out. Definitely the consumer will look for new products from other countries. This will strengthen other emerging markets. And I would like to come back to your point on regarding that China is passive. China is not passive at all, because the trade with the imports from China to Vietnam are increasing at the same pace like Vietnamese exports are increasing to the US. So China already finds its loopholes, and these loopholes will be also enter the market, the US market, and ultimately the consumer. I think there will be a shock in the first place, a bit of a price shock in the first place, but then the market will rearrange and readjust. After all, we are still in a free market and in a world economy. And also the Trump administration wants to force the Europeans to the negotiation table, not only in relation to tariffs, but also politically, that they will agree to the armistice and ultimate peace deal which Trump has proposed between Russia and the Ukraine.
In response to the impending US tariffs, China has outlined plans to boost domestic customer spending to mitigate potential export losses. How effective do you anticipate these measures will be in sustaining China's economic growth?
I was in China a couple of times last year. I will be back soon, and the Chinese consumer is definitely back on track. Slowly, if you divide consumption into essential, non-essential, and luxury, I would say essential is definitely back on track. Non-essential is a bit tricky, and luxury could be much better, definitely. I just spoke to a funding manager in Hong Kong, Mr. Max Ribble from the Web3 global community Polkadot, and he said funding and also investment in VCs, in venture capital companies, is increasing, and also in startups. So definitely there's already a momentum, a new momentum in investment, but also in consumption. And I think these measures will be effective also because tourism is coming back. Me, as a German national, I don't need a visa for China since more than a year, and 38 other countries were also put on the visa-free list, which also boosts tourism, and more airlines are also adding flights to China. Recently, Emirates Airline, for example, said the People's Daily reported in China that Emirates Airline will go to Shenzhen from July onwards. So definitely there's new momentum. I'm optimistic about these measures.
Gerard Al-Fil, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We now move on. After 9 months, 289 days and counting, NASA astronauts Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore are finally preparing for their long-awaited return to Earth that the entire world is waiting for. The long extended stay of the two was a result of technical issues with Boeing's Starliner spacecraft, which initially transported them to ISS but had returned without them due to multiple malfunctions. Following this, NASA decided to bring the astronauts back using SpaceX's Crew Dragon. However, SpaceX faced battery issues in a newly built Dragon capsule, further delaying the return of the stranded astronauts. The astronauts are finally scheduled to return to Earth on March the 18th. A SpaceX capsule carrying a new crew has docked at the International Space Station. In live footage, the astronauts were seen embracing each other and hugging their counterparts as soon as the new crew docked. There will be a 2-day handover, after which the old crew due to begin their journey back to Earth. But there could be a small further delay as they wait for conditions on Earth to be right for a safe re-entry of the returning capsule, according to Dana Weigel, the manager of the International Space Center program. The astronauts have consistently said that they have been happy to be on board the space station, with Sunita Williams describing it as her happy place. But Dr. Simeon Barber of the Open University in a report said that there would likely be a personal cost. Space travel is indeed an extraordinary experience, but after their return to Earth, the two astronauts will likely undergo significant physiological and psychological changes. Their bodies, accustomed to the weightlessness, must readapt to Earth's gravity, and this process can take weeks, even months. Before we dive into the discussion on the health challenges of the astronauts and the process of their return, let's take a listen to what the astronauts have said about their journey in the last months.
Alexei and Yvonne here. So, I mean, we're here with our friends. I think that's really a key part of being on the International Space Station and actually just doing the work. So that's, I think the up part is we're here with our friends. We've got a ride home. And, you know, we're looking forward to the next couple months and doing a lot of stuff for the International Space Station.
I'm just wondering if you feel like politics influenced the decision, and would you have wanted to come home earlier?
From my standpoint, politics is not playing into this at all. From our standpoint, I think that they would agree. We came up prepared to stay long, even though we planned to stay short. That's what we do in human spaceflight. That's what your nation's human spaceflight program is all about, planning for unknown, unexpected contingencies.
When asked what the astronaut Sunita Williams will miss about space, here is what she said a few days ago.
I'm going to miss about space, everything about space. You know, this has been Butch and my third flight to the International Space Station. We helped put it together. We've been up here seeing it change throughout all these years, do a lot of science up here. I think just the fact that we're living up here in this very unique place gives you an amazing perspective, not only, you know, out the window, obviously, but also just on how to solve problems. I don't want to lose that spark of inspiration and that perspective when I leave, so I'm going to have to bottle it.
We are now joined by Surinder Pal, former ISRO scientist located in Bangalore. Thank you very much for joining us. Obviously, this is amazing news that these two astronauts are coming home after such a long time in space. But what are the sort of health implications that these two are going to experience when they get back home, and what kind of tests will they have to go under to make sure that their health is all good?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's a very welcome that they are returning back after 9 months, although a person have stayed in the space more than this month. I mean, somebody has stayed more than 600 days. So it's not a problem as far as staying in the space is concerned. They return, technologically, if we see the Dragon Crew 10 or SpaceX Dragon Crew has undergone various tests, quality control, quality assurance, and various simulations. And it has proved by taking it and docking with the ISS that it's technically competent spacecraft where everything is taken care. Whatsoever has happened is the Starliner, all those things have been taken care here, and I understand that the triple redundancies are there, and it's meeting all the human rating standards. As far as the psychological and physiological changes are concerned, these are expected, but since they have undergone 3 times earlier, so it will be possible that they can recoup. In my opinion, the only thing which cannot be controlled is if there is a radiation effect. Otherwise, the
yes,
body mass effect, muscle mass effect, and reduction in the bone density, etc., can be taken care. And also, muscle strength can be built, and they must have had a program, must be having a program to see that all things are built. But any radiation impact is there, that has to be seen.
Yes, Surinder, could you tell me the sort of rigorous tests that that need to be carried out before a mission of this magnitude? It seems that if the smallest thing is not correct, then they couldn't return home. Could you please explain to me why these scientists couldn't come home and why their stay has been extended for so long?
Since we are above the atmosphere, since we are above the atmosphere, there is no radiation shielding. Of course, there is a shielding provided in the ISS, but they have gone out also. 6 times they have gone out. And in spite of providing the shielding, still some radiation particles, will go inside and affect them. And the human body, particularly the brain, is susceptible to radiation doses and damages. So radiation doses, which they monitor it every time, all those data, when it comes back to ground, I'm sure the doctors and specialists will look into it and appropriate steps will be taken, because radiation doses are monitored every second. Not only this, when they go out, their space suit also has got a radiation dose monitor. So that effect, they will be able to estimate it and mitigation technology or measures will be taken.
Surinder, what is the conditions on the International Space Station? How many people are allowed to be there at one time? What are the details that is interesting to know about the space station that you feel like isn't given enough publicity in this case?
Well, they have conducted somewhere the 200 experiments, I understand, and many of experiments are biological or maybe experiments. So all those things will help to understand the space environment. See, this will help when next they're planning to go to moon, then further interplanetary things. It will help in all those directions. Not only this, technologically, three nations which are involved and other nations which are conducting experiments will gain experience how to deal with the space. So space is complex. Space looks very good, but it's also terrible when something happens to it. And to manage all the things, a complicated mechanism is needed, which is there in the ISS, and it's in place. I understand enough redundancies are existing for everything. That's why they went for 1 week and could survive for 9 months.
Surrender. There could be a small delay in them returning to Earth. The conditions on Earth have to be correct for these astronauts safely being able to re-enter the atmosphere. What are these conditions that makes it safe for the spaceship to return to Earth?
See, first of all, there should not be, when they are entering, there should not be atmospheric disturbances. Environment plays an important part. And if it's rainy, etc., then also it creates problem because for some time there will not be any communication with the capsule. So, where it should land, all those things will not work if the atmosphere is not proper. Even the angle of entering the atmosphere, if the atmospheric density, etc., is improper, then it makes a difference. It can deviate from a place. So all those things have to be taken. So it depends on the weather conditions, and those weather conditions will be fed into the computer, and they found out what is the correct angle of incidence and what is the correct trajectory they can.
Surrender, pal. Thank you.
So weather conditions, because all tracking networks are there.
Surrender, pal, thank you very much for joining us. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from across the world.